Staff Sergeant Jonah Mitchell survived 3 grueling combat tours in the Middle East, navigating minefields and insurgent ambushes with his elite Ghost Squad-trained German Shepherd, Titan. But the most terrifying war zone he would ever face wasn't in a blood-soaked desert. It was behind the front door of his own childhood home in suburban Pennsylvania. Expecting a warm embrace from his loving mother, he instead walked into a chilling house of horrors, stripped of its warmth and life. The woman who raised him was abandoned, starving, and hiding in the dark. What Jonah uncovered next was a twisted web of family betrayal that would push this hardened Marine to his absolute breaking point. The tires of Jonah's rented Chevy Tahoe hummed a steady rhythm against the asphalt of Interstate 95. Outside, the vibrant reds and golds of an East Coast autumn blurred past the windows, a stark, beautiful contrast to the endless, suffocating beige of the Syrian desert he had just left behind. Jonah gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white, his chest tight with a mixture of profound relief and an unexplainable gnawing anxiety. He was finally going home. In the passenger seat, sitting bolt upright with the stoic discipline of a soldier on watch, was Titan. Titan was a 90-pound sable German Shepherd, his coat thick and coarse, his intelligent amber eyes constantly scanning the passing cars. He wasn't a standard military working dog. Titan had begun his career in Coronado, California, trained by the Ghost Squads for high-value target extraction and specialized tactical combat. When his original handler, a SEAL Team 6 operator named Brody, was killed in action during a joint task force raid, Titan had refused to work with anyone else until Jonah, a Marine recon sniper attached to the operation, had pulled the grieving dog from the rubble. They had bled together, survived together, and now they were retiring together. Titan bore a jagged, hairless scar across his snout, a permanent reminder of the shrapnel that had nearly taken both their lives. Jonah reached over, his calloused hand resting on Titan's massive head. The dog leaned into the touch, letting out a low, rumbling sigh. "Almost there, buddy," Jonah murmured, his voice raspy from years of swallowing sand and smoke. "Wait until you meet my mom. She makes a pot roast that will make you forget what MREs taste like." Martha Mitchell was the anchor of Jonah's world. She was a retired schoolteacher, a widow who had raised 2 boys on a meager pension and an endless reserve of love. When Jonah deployed for his final tour 18 months ago, Martha had been showing the early signs of physical frailty, a bad hip, a slight tremor in her hands, and moments of forgetfulness. Jonah had been terrified to leave her, but his older brother, Percival, had sworn on their late father's grave that he would step up. Percival was a successful financial planner in Philadelphia, a man who wore tailored suits and drove European sports cars. "Go do your duty, little brother," Percival had said at the airport, clapping Jonah on the shoulder. "I'm moving Mom into my place. I've got her finances sorted, her medical care covered. Focus on keeping your head down. I've got the home front." Jonah had wired his entire hazard pay and re-enlistment bonuses directly to Percival's account, nearly $80,000, to ensure Martha wanted for nothing. He had sent letters every week, though the replies had stopped coming about 6 months ago. Percival had blamed it on the postal service and poor cell reception when Jonah managed a brief satellite phone call. Turning off the highway onto the familiar winding roads of Riverdale, Jonah's heart rate began to climb. He recognized the old oak trees, the fading sign of the local diner, the cracked sidewalks he had skateboarded down as a kid. He turned onto Elm Street, expecting to see the neatly manicured lawn and the bright yellow front door of his childhood home. He had planned to surprise her. He hadn't told Percival he was discharging a month early, but as the Tahoe rolled to a stop in front of the property, Jonah slammed on the brakes so hard the anti-lock system stuttered. He stared through the windshield, his breath catching in his throat. The house looked like a corpse. The once pristine lawn was a jungle of dead, waist-high weeds and thorny briars. The gutters were detached, hanging like broken limbs, spilling rot down the faded, peeling siding. The front porch, where Martha used to sit and knit on summer evenings, was sagging dangerously, swallowed by overgrown ivy. But worst of all was the mailbox. It was practically bursting, stuffed with waterlogged envelopes and final notice bills that had spilled onto the cracked concrete of the driveway. Every combat instinct Jonah had honed over a decade of war suddenly flared to life. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. The silence of the suburban street felt exactly like the suffocating quiet of a village right before an ambush. Titan sensed the shift immediately. The dog's ears pinned back, his muscles tensing beneath his thick coat. A low, vibrating growl started in his chest. "Stay sharp, T," Jonah whispered, unbuckling his seatbelt. He stepped out of the vehicle, the crisp autumn air feeling suddenly freezing against his skin. This wasn't a home. It was a ghost ship, and Percival was nowhere to be found. Jonah moved up the driveway with measured, silent steps, heel to toe, exactly as he would approaching a hostile compound. Titan shadowed him perfectly, pressing his flank against Jonah's left leg, his nose twitching as he took in the sense of the neglected property. As they reached the wooden steps of the porch, Jonah saw a bright neon orange sticker slapped across the front window. It had been partially scraped away, but the bold black letters were still legible. Notice of condemnation, unsafe for habitation, property of Riverdale Municipal Court. Jonah's blood ran cold. Property of the court? Percival had sworn the mortgage was paid off years ago. He had sworn he was taking care of the taxes with Jonah's deployment money. He reached for the doorknob. It was cold brass, tarnished black. He expected it to be locked, but the latch gave way with a sickening click. The door creaked inward, scraping heavily against the floorboards. The smell hit him first, punching the air from his lungs. It was a heavy, suffocating stench of mildew, stale urine, rot, and freezing dust. It was the smell of absolute abandonment. "Mom?" Jonah called out. His voice cracked, echoing hollowly in the dark space. No answer. He stepped into the foyer, Titan pushing past him to take the lead. The SEAL-trained K9 immediately dropped into a tactical sweep posture, his nose low to the ground, clearing the living room. The house had been completely stripped. The heavy oak dining table, the antique grandfather clock, the plush sofa where they used to watch Sunday football, all of it was gone. Even the brass light fixtures had been unscrewed from the ceiling, leaving dangling, exposed wires. Rectangular, unfaded outlines on the floral wallpaper marked where family portraits and landscape paintings had once hung. The carpet had been ripped up, leaving bare, splintered plywood beneath Jonah's boots. Someone hadn't just moved out. They had scavenged the house for every penny of value. "Clear," Jonah muttered under his breath, signaling Titan. Titan moved down the hallway, stopping abruptly at the closed door of the master bedroom. The dog didn't bark. Instead, he sat rigid, pointing his snout directly at the base of the door, letting out a sharp, anxious whine. Jonah's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Out of pure, ingrained reflex, his hand drifted to the concealed 9mm, Glock tucked into the waistband of his jeans. He forced his hand away. He pushed the door open. The bedroom was freezing. The window had been broken, patched hastily with a piece of cardboard that had rotted through, allowing the bitter November wind to bite into the room. In the far corner, on a stained bare mattress lying directly on the floor, was a mound of filthy, threadbare blankets. The mound trembled. "Mom?" Jonah choked out, falling to his knees beside the mattress. He gently pulled back the top layer of the blanket. What he saw made a hardened, combat-decorated Marine sob aloud. Martha Mitchell was curled into a fetal position, her frail body reduced to skin and bones. Her silver hair, once meticulously styled, was matted and wild. Her skin was a terrifying, translucent shade of gray, her lips cracked and blue from the cold. Beside her lay a plastic bucket containing yellowed water and a few empty cans of cheap cat food. Titan whimpered, stepping forward to gently press his warm, wet nose against Martha's frozen cheek. Martha's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy, completely disoriented, swimming with terror. She flinched away from Jonah, pulling her bony arms over her head in a defensive posture. "No, no, please," she rasped, her voice weaker than a whisper. "Percival said he's coming back. He said he's just going to the bank. Don't take the house. Please don't take the house. Mom. Mom, look at me," Jonah pleaded, tears freely tracking down his weather-beaten face. He reached out, his large hands trembling as he cupped her face. "It's Jonah. It's your boy. I'm home. She blinked, struggling to focus on his face in the dim light. A full minute passed. The only sound the rattling wheeze of her breathing and the est. Then, a tiny spark of recognition pierced through the haze of her delirium. Jonah? She whispered, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. My brave boy? But you're in the desert. Percival said you stopped writing. He said you didn't want to come home. Rage pure, unadulterated. Blinding rage ignited in Jonah's chest, burning away his sorrow in an instant. Percival hadn't just abandoned her. He had lied to her. He had broken her heart while he starved her in the freezing dark. I'm here, Mom. I'm never leaving you again, Jonah said fiercely. He stripped off his heavy, fleece-lined tactical jacket and wrapped it tightly around her frail frame. He scooped her up into his arms. She weighed absolutely nothing, light as a bundle of dry reeds. Tighten, with me, Jonah commanded. He carried his mother out of the House of Echoes, kicking the front door wide open. As he laid her gently and sent you the heated cab of the Tahoe and dialed 911, he looked back at the rotting house. He didn't just want answers anymore. He wanted a reckoning. The emergency room at St. Jude's Medical Center was a chaotic blur of fluorescent lights and screeching monitors, but Jonah sat frozen in a plastic chair, staring at the floor. Titan lay faithfully across his boots, occasionally licking Jonah's knuckles to keep him grounded. The hospital staff, usually strict about animals, had taken one look at the heavily decorated Marine and his intensely disciplined service dog and decided not to say a word. After 3 agonizing hours, Dr. Harrison, a weary-looking man with graying temples, pushed through the swinging doors. Jonah shot to his feet. How is she? Jonah demanded. Dr. Harrison let out a heavy sigh, pulling off his glasses. Staff Sergeant, I won't sugarcoat it. Your mother is in critical condition. She's suffering from severe malnutrition, chronic dehydration, and advanced double-lobe pneumonia. Her core body temperature was dangerously low. Furthermore, we ran her blood work. She hasn't had her heart medication or her dementia treatments in at least 7 or 8 months. The doctor paused, his jaw tightening. If you hadn't found her today, she wouldn't have survived the weekend. Jonah felt the floor drop out from under him. She was supposed to be living with my brother. She had money. I sent them 80 grand. The doctor looked at him with profound pity. I suggest you call the police, son. We are mandated to report this as elder abuse. I've already contacted Adult Protective Services. I'll handle my brother, Jonah said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like grinding granite. Jonah walked out to the hospital parking lot, the cold air doing nothing to cool the inferno raging inside him. He pulled out his phone and dialed Percival's number. It rang 4 times before going straight to a slick, automated voicemail. You've reached Percival Mitchell, senior partner at Vanguard Financial. Leave a message. Jonah didn't leave a message. Instead, he pulled up his banking app. He checked the transfer history of his military accounts. Every cent, every bonus, every month of hazard pay had been successfully routed to the joint family trust account. He needed to see it for himself. Leaving Titan to guard the Tahoe, Jonah walked 3 blocks to the local branch of First Riverdale Bank. Inside, he spotted Jessica behind the teller counter. They had gone to high school together, shared a locker in 10th grade. When she saw him approach, her polite smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure panic. Jonah, she stammered, glancing nervously toward the branch manager's office. You're home early, Jessica, Jonah said, placing his hands flat on the polished marble counter. He kept his voice perfectly level, which only made him more intimidating. Look up my mother's accounts, the joint trust, her pension, the checking, all of it. Jonah, I can't. Privacy laws. Jess. I just pulled my mother out of a freezing, condemned house. She weighs 80 pounds and is fighting for her life in the ICU. Look at the account. Jessica swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she typed on her keyboard. She turned the monitor slightly so Jonah could see. Balance, $0. Account status, closed. When? Jonah asked. 6 months ago, Jessica whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Percival came in. He had a full, notarized power of attorney. He liquidated the trust, cashed out her state pension, and transferred every single deposit you sent into an offshore holding LLC. Jonah. I asked him about it. He told me he was moving her into the Willow Creek Luxury Assisted Living Center in Philadelphia. He said the house was being sold to pay for around-the-clock nursing. Percival had taken it all. He had stolen Jonah's blood money, stripped their childhood home to the copper wire, left their mother to die like a stray dog, and kept the profits. Jonah walked out of the bank in absolute silence. He climbed into the Tahoe. We're going for a ride. Titan, he said, shifting the truck into gear. An hour later, Jonah pulled into the affluent, heavily manicured suburb of mainline Philadelphia. He had used a military skip tracer buddy to pull Percival's current address based on the LLC documents. He pulled up to a massive 3-story modern farmhouse with a wraparound porch, pristine landscaping, and a brand-new charcoal gray Mercedes G-Wagon parked in the circular driveway. This was where Jonah's blood money had gone. This was where his mother's life savings lived. Jonah stepped out of the truck. Titan flanked him, sensing his master's lethal intent. The dog's teeth were bared, a silent, terrifying predator, ready to be unleashed. Jonah walked up the bluestone steps and bypassed the doorbell. He pounded his fist against the heavy oak door with enough force to rattle the stained glass. Footsteps echoed inside. The door swung open. Percival stood there, looking completely relaxed. He was wearing a plush silk bathrobe over tailored slacks, holding a crystal tumbler of amber scotch. He was slightly heavier than Jonah remembered, his face soft and pampered. Percival's smug expression froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him as pale as the silk robe he wore. The scotch glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor of his foyer, amber liquid splashing across his expensive Italian loafers. See? Jonah? Percival stuttered, taking a step backward. You weren't supposed to be back until spring. Where is she, Percival? Jonah asked softly, his voice cutting through the air like a razor blade. She's at the facility. Jonah, I swear, I can explain everything. The house had black mold. It was condemned. Percival was talking fast, his eyes darting frantically to the massive, snarling German shepherd at Jonah's hip. Before Jonah could move, a woman's voice called out from the top of the grand sweeping staircase. Artie, honey. Who's at the door? Is the caterer here for the party tonight? Percival's new wife, Beatrice, glided down the stairs. She was wearing a sleek cocktail dress, a glass of champagne in her hand. But it wasn't her dress that made Jonah's vision swim with red. Resting against Beatrice's collarbone, sparkling under the foyer chandelier, was a heavy, antique diamond and sapphire necklace. It was a Mitchell family heirloom, the exact necklace their father had bought for Martha on their 25th anniversary. The necklace that Martha had explicitly put in the family safe to be sold only if she ever needed life-saving medical care. Jonah stepped over the threshold, his boots crunching on the broken glass of Percival's scotch glass. Hello, Percival, Jonah whispered. I brought the war home. The silence in the grand foyer of Percival's mainline mansion was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a massive, modern grandfather clock and the ragged, panicked breathing of Percival Mitchell. The crushed crystal of the scotch glass crunched beneath Jonah's heavy combat boots as he took a slow, deliberate step forward. Beatrice, oblivious to the lethal tension radiating from the younger brother she had never met, placed a manicured hand on her hip. She adjusted the heavy diamond and sapphire necklace, Martha's emergency lifeline, so it caught the light of the crystal chandelier. Percival, who on earth is this? Beatrice demanded, her voice dripping with mainline entitlement. And why is there a wild animal in my house? The carpets are custom wool. Shut up, B, Percival hissed, his eyes locked entirely on Jonah and the 90-pound, battle-scarred German shepherd at his side. Titan didn't bark. Ghost Squad K9S were trained to operate in absolute stealth behind enemy lines. Instead, Titan dropped his hips slightly, his center of gravity shifting into a coiled spring. His lips curled back just enough to reveal razor-sharp canines, and a low, subsonic vibration emanated from his chest, a warning that he was one hand signal away from tearing Percival's throat out. "Jonah, listen to me," Percival stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Sweat was beading on his forehead, glistening in the warm, ambient lighting of his multi-million-dollar home. "You don't understand the whole picture. Mom." Mom was losing her mind. The dementia. It was getting aggressive. She was a danger to herself. The house was falling apart. I had to step in. Jonah didn't yell. The terrifying calm of a sniper taking a breath before pulling the trigger settled over him. "She has double-lobe pneumonia, Percival. She weighs 80 pounds. She was drinking dirty water out of a plastic bucket." Percival swallowed hard, taking another step back until his shoulders hit the mahogany wainscoting. The facility. Willow Creek. They were supposed to be checking on her. I paid for in-home care while they prepped her room. The contractors were supposed to fix the heating. I've been swamped at the firm. Jonah, the market took a massive hit last quarter. I've been working 80-hour weeks just to keep Vanguard Financial afloat. I thought the nurses were going to the house. "You're a terrible liar, Artie," Jonah said softly. "You always have been. Even when we were kids, your left eye twitched when you lied." Jonah took 2 massive strides across the foyer. Percival whimpered and tried to duck, but Jonah wasn't aiming for his brother. He bypassed Percival entirely and stepped right into Beatrice's personal space. Beatrice gasped, smelling the gun oil, desert dust, and cold wind clinging to Jonah's jacket. "Take it off," Jonah commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me?" Beatrice stammered, clutching her champagne flute. "The necklace. Take it off right now, or I am going to rip it off your neck, and I won't care if I take some skin with it." "Percival, do something!" Beatrice shrieked. Percival squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head away. "Just give it to him, Bea." Trembling, Beatrice reached behind her neck, fumbled with the antique platinum clasp, and let the heavy necklace drop into Jonah's waiting, calloused palm. The sapphires were cold. Jonah shoved the heirloom deep into the pocket of his tactical jacket. "Tighten." "Watch," Jonah commanded in a sharp, clipped tone. Titan immediately moved to block the front door, his amber eyes fixed unblinkingly on Percival. He was a living barricade. "Where is your office?" Jonah asked, turning back to his brother. "Jonah, please, you can't just—" Jonah closed the distance in a fraction of a second. His hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of Percival's expensive silk robe and the shirt beneath it. He slammed his older brother against the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. A framed photograph of Percival shaking hands with a local politician crashed to the floor. "Where is the office, Percival?" Jonah repeated, his forearm pressing just hard enough against Percival's collarbone to make breathing difficult. Down the hall. On the left," Percival gasped. Jonah released him in disgust. He marched down the hallway, kicking open the double doors of a lavish home office. It reeked of expensive cigars and leather. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a heavy digital steel safe. "Open it," Jonah said, as Percival stumbled into the room behind him, holding his bruised chest. "Jonah, there's client confidentiality in there. I can't. Open the safe." "Percival, or I'm going to have Titan break your arm. And then I'm going to take your hand and press your thumb against the biometric scanner myself." Percival saw the absolute certainty in his brother's eyes. This wasn't a bluff. The military had stripped away whatever suburban, polite fiction Jonah used to possess. Defeated, Percival limped to the safe, punched in a 6-digit code, and pressed his thumb to the pad. The heavy bolts clicked open. Jonah shoved Percival aside. He began pulling out stacks of documents. There were thick folders labeled with Vanguard Financial client names, but Jonah ignored them. He was looking for the Mitchell family name. He found a thick manila envelope near the bottom. He ripped it open. Inside was a stack of legal documents that made Jonah's blood run freezing cold. The first was a medical evaluation signed by a Dr. Gregory Sterling. It declared Martha Mitchell completely legally incompetent. suffering from advanced, rapid-onset Alzheimer's disease. The date on the document was just 2 weeks after Jonah had deployed to Syria. The second document was a full, irrevocable power of attorney, granting Percival total control over Martha's assets, healthcare, and real estate. But it was the third document that made Jonah's vision swim with red. It was a life insurance policy underwritten by a massive national conglomerate. The insured was Martha Mitchell. The payout was $1.5 million. The sole beneficiary was Percival Mitchell. Percival hadn't just neglected their mother out of greed. He had financially insured her death. He had locked her in a freezing, condemned house, cut off her medication, and waited for nature to take its course so he could collect a massive payout. Jonah turned around slowly. The legal papers crumpled in his massive grip. "You didn't just abandon her," Jonah whispered, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like a physical weight in the room. "You were starving her to death for $1.5 million. It's not what it looks like," Percival cried, backing toward the door. "Vanguard was going under. I leveraged everything I had. Mom's money was just supposed to be a bridge loan. The insurance policy was collateral for a private equity group. If I went bankrupt, I would have gone to federal prison, Jonah. I had to protect the family name." Jonah walked toward his brother. He didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He leaned in close, his face inches from Percival's sweating, pathetic visage. "You're going to lose everything, Percival," Jonah said softly. "I am going to burn your life to the ground. I'm going to take this house. I'm going to take your firm. And then I'm going to put you in a concrete cell. If you try to run, I will hunt you down. If you come anywhere near the hospital, I will let Titan off the leash." Jonah walked out of the office, documents in hand. He signaled Titan, and the two warriors walked out the front door, leaving Percival Mitchell collapsing to the floor of his stolen mansion, sobbing, the rhythmic, monotonous beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile ICU room at St. Jude's Medical Center. It had been 48 hours since Jonah had pulled his mother from the rotting house on Elm Street. Martha was currently sleeping, an IV drip feeding life-saving antibiotics and nutrients directly into her frail veins. She looked infinitesimally better. The terrifying gray pallor had faded from her cheeks, but she was still heartbreakingly fragile. The doctors said her heart, weakened by months without her prescribed medication, was a ticking time bomb. Jonah sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor. Titan lay beneath the bed, acting as a living, breathing heat source and an immovable guard dog. Every time a nurse entered the room, Titan would quietly observe them, ensuring they meant no harm before resting his massive head back on his paws. The door creaked open, and a man in a sharp, albeit slightly rumpled, charcoal suit stepped in. He carried a battered leather briefcase and had the unmistakable upright posture of a former military officer. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell?" the man asked, his voice low and respectful. Jonah stood up, offering his hand. "You must be David Russo." David took the hand, his grip firm. "Former captain, Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Marine Corps. Now I fight the good fight. As a civilian pit bull. Your old commanding officer, Major Hayes, called me. Said you needed the meanest lawyer in Pennsylvania. I don't just need a lawyer, Mr. Russo. I need an executioner," Jonah said, his voice flat. He pointed to the small table in the corner where he had laid out the documents he had taken from Percival's safe. "Look at those." David Russo walked over, put on a pair of reading glasses, and began to scan the paperwork. As he read, the professional neutrality on his face slowly morphed into a deep, furious scowl. He tapped a manicured finger against the medical evaluation signed by Dr. Gregory Sterling. "This is sloppy," David muttered. "This Dr. Sterling. I know the name. He runs a high-end concierge medical practice in Center City. He caters to the elite. He's been investigated before for writing loose prescriptions for wealthy housewives. I guarantee you Percival paid him a massive cash bribe to sign off on this incompetency evaluation without ever actually examining your mother. Can we prove it?" Jonah asked. "Proving it is the tricky part," David said, pacing the small room. Elder abuse cases are notoriously difficult, especially when the abuser holds a legally binding power of attorney. Percival will argue that he was acting in her best financial interest, that the house was a toxic environment, and that he was simply waiting for a bed to open up at a facility. The life insurance policy is highly suspicious, but not inherently illegal if he had her legal proxy. Jonah felt a surge of frustration. He starved her in a freezing house, David. He stole $80,000 of my combat pay. He took her pension, and we are going to nail him to the wall for every red cent, David said fiercely. But we have to be smart. We can't just hit him with a civil suit. He's likely hidden the money in offshore LLCs. We need criminal charges. We need wire fraud, bank fraud, and criminal endangerment. David pulled out a legal pad and began to map out the strategy. First, I am filing an emergency injunction to strip Percival of the power of attorney and name you as her sole guardian. That stops the bleeding. Second, I've already hired a forensic accountant. We started looking into Vanguard Financial yesterday after Hayes called me. Jonah, your brother's firm is a house of cards. He's been heavily shorting tech stocks and getting slaughtered. Vanguard is essentially running a Ponzi scheme right now, using new investor money to pay off the old ones. He drained your mother's trust and your military accounts just to cover his margin calls. So he's desperate, Jonah noted. He's a drowning man, David agreed. And drowning men do stupid things. I visited the Willow Creek Assisted Living Center this morning. The director was very cooperative once I mentioned the word subpoena. Percival did indeed bring your mother there 6 months ago. He paid for exactly 1 week in cash. He took a bunch of photos of her in the nice dining room, presumably to show the bank or his investors that he was a dutiful son. And then he checked her out 5 days later, claiming he was moving her to a specialized memory care unit in another state. Instead, he dumped her back in Riverdale. Jonah clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ground together. What's our next move? We squeeze the weakest link, David said, pointing to the medical document. Dr. Gregory Sterling. If we can prove Sterling falsified this medical record, the power of attorney becomes fraudulent. If the POA is fraudulent, every bank transfer Percival made is a federal crime. But we need hard evidence. Text messages, emails, bank transfers, between Percival and the doctor. Leave the doctor to me, Jonah said, his eyes darkening. David held up a hand. Hold on, Marine. No tactical raids. If you threaten a doctor, the whole case gets thrown out, and you go to Leavenworth. We do this by the book. I'll just ask him some questions, Jonah said evenly. Before David could argue, Martha shifted in the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, landing on Jonah. Jonah? She rasped, her voice dry. Jonah rushed to her side, gently taking her fragile hand. I'm here, Mom. I'm right here. I had the most awful dream, she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. I dreamt Percival locked me in the dark. I was so cold. Jonah. He took my wedding ring. He said I didn't need it anymore. Jonah froze. He took Dad's wedding ring? He pulled it right off my finger. Martha sobbed quietly. It hurt. Jonah kissed her forehead, his heart breaking all over again. It wasn't a dream, Mom. But the nightmare is over. I promise you. As Martha drifted back to sleep, Jonah turned to David Russo. The lawyer saw the look in the Marine's eyes and took a step back. David, Jonah said, his voice terrifyingly calm. File the injunction. Get the accountant working on the Vanguard books. I have an errand to run. Jonah, don't do anything stupid, David warned. I'm going back to Elm Street. I'm going to see what else my brother missed in that house. Jonah looked down at the massive dog beneath the bed. Titan. Up. The dog silently slid out from under the bed, falling in step perfectly beside Jonah. The war wasn't over. It was just changing theaters. The Riverdale house looked even more menacing in the dead of night. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of November clouds, casting the overgrown property in deep, suffocating shadows. The neon orange condemnation sticker on the front window looked like a glowing scar in the darkness. Jonah parked his rented Tahoe 2 blocks away, electing to approach the house on foot. He wore dark clothing, moving with the silent, practiced grace of a recon sniper navigating hostile territory. Titan walked slightly ahead of him, his nose practically vacuuming the air, searching for anomalies. Jonah needed to find Martha's old lockbox. He remembered his mother had a hidden floorboard in the hall closet where she kept physical keepsakes, old letters from his father, birth certificates, and sometimes emergency cash. Percival might have stripped the house to the copper wire, but Jonah doubted his soft, arrogant brother had crawled around on his hands and knees checking the subflooring. If the lockbox was there, it might hold old bank statements or evidence of Martha's actual state of mind before Percival isolated her. Jonah bypassed the front door, slipping through the broken gate of the backyard. He picked the cheap padlock on the back patio door in under 10 seconds and slipped inside. Titan practically melting into the shadows beside him. The house was freezing, smelling of rot and despair. Jonah clicked on a small, red lens tactical flashlight. Red light didn't ruin night vision and couldn't be easily seen from the street. He moved silently through the gutted kitchen and into the main hallway. He found the closet, dropped to one knee, and began pressing against the floorboards. After a minute of searching, he felt a slight give. He pried up a section of the oak flooring. There it was, a dusty, fireproof metal lockbox. Jonah pulled it out, feeling a small surge of victory. But before he could open it, Titan's head snapped up. The dog didn't growl. Instead, he bumped his nose hard against Jonah's thigh, the silent military signal for an approaching threat. Titan's ears were swiveled toward the front of the house. Jonah instantly clicked off the red flashlight, plunging the hallway into absolute pitch-black darkness. He held his breath, his hand instinctively dropping to the handle of the combat knife strapped to his thigh. Crunch, crunch. Footsteps on the dead grass of the front lawn. Heavy footsteps. Not police. Police announce themselves. Police carry heavy gear that clinks. These footsteps were trying to be quiet, and failing miserably. There was a scratching sound at the front door lock, followed by a muffled curse. "Just kick the damn thing," a gruff voice whispered outside. "Place is condemned anyway." A second later, the front door burst open with a loud splintering of wood. 2 large silhouettes stepped into the foyer. The ambient streetlight from outside illuminated them briefly. They weren't local kids looking to vandalize an empty house. They were large men, wearing heavy leather jackets and dark beanies. One was carrying a heavy steel crowbar. The other had a suppressed, semi-automatic pistol in his hand. Percival had sent a cleanup crew. "Check the back rooms," the man with the gun whispered. Mitchell said the soldier might come back here looking for souvenirs. If he's here, break his legs. If he's not, pour the gasoline and strike a match. The boss wants this place gone tonight. Jonah's blood ran cold, followed immediately by a surge of pure adrenaline. Percival was terrified. He was trying to burn down the crime scene, and he didn't care if Jonah was inside when it happened. Jonah gently placed the lockbox on the floor. He knelt down next to Titan and tapped the side of the dog's neck twice. It was the command for search and subdue. Titan vanished. In the pitch black of the house, the 90-pound German shepherd moved like a ghost. His padded paws made absolutely zero sound on the bare plywood floors. The man with the crowbar walked past the hallway closet, moving toward the master bedroom where Martha had been kept. "Smells like a crypt in here," he muttered, turning on a bright, blinding flashlight. He never saw the dog. Titan launched himself from the shadows of the living room, a silent, furry missile. The dog hit the man square in the chest, 90 pounds of muscle and teeth striking with the force of a battering ram. The man let out a gargled scream as the air was blasted from his lungs. He crashed backward through the rotted drywall of the hallway. Titan's jaws clamped shut not on the man's throat, but on the forearm holding the crowbar. The sickening crunch of bone echoed in the house, followed by the man dropping the steel bar. "What the?" The second man with the gun shouted, spinning around, raising his weapon toward the chaos. Before he could align his sights on the dog, Jonah struck. Emerging from the shadows of the closet like a nightmare, Jonah grabbed the barrel of the suppressed pistol, forcefully redirecting it toward the ceiling. The man pulled the trigger out of panic, a muffled thwip sending a bullet safely into the plaster above. Jonah stepped into the man's guard, delivering a devastating, textbook Krav Maga elbow strike directly to the man's temple. The thug's eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the floor like a sack of wet cement, out cold before he hit the ground. Jonah spun around. Titan was standing over the first man, who was sobbing in pain, clutching his broken arm. Titan's teeth were bared, hovering an inch from the man's face, waiting for Jonah's command. "Good boy, hold," Jonah ordered. Jonah walked over to the man on the floor, kicking the crowbar away. He knelt down, pulling the man's beanie off by his hair. "Who sent you?" Jonah asked, his voice dead and terrifyingly calm. "Screw you, man." The thug spat, grimacing in pain. Jonah sighed. He looked at Titan. "Take the other arm." Titan growled, shifting his massive jaws toward the man's uninjured left arm. Wait! God! Call off the dog!" The man screamed in terror. "A guy named Mitchell. Fancy suit. Rich guy from Philly. Paid us 10 grand each to burn this place down and make sure you got the message to back off." Jonah reached into the man's leather jacket and pulled out a cheap burner phone. He flipped it open. There was only one number in the recent contacts. He pressed send. It rang twice. "Is it done?" Percival's panicked voice crackled through the cheap speaker. "Did you burn it? Is my brother handled?" Jonah held the phone to his ear. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. "Percival," Jonah whispered into the receiver. He heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by the sound of glass shattering. Percival had dropped another drink. "You sent 2 men to kill me and burn our mother's house down," Jonah said, his voice echoing in the dark, ruined hallway. "You missed. Now, I'm coming for you, and I'm bringing the dark with me." Jonah crushed the burner phone in his grip, dropping the plastic pieces onto the floor. He looked at the lockbox at his feet. It was time to open it, expose the final layer of Percival's lies, and end this war once and for all. The heavy metal of the fireproof lockbox felt freezing against Jonah's calloused hands. He sat on the splintered floorboards of his ruined childhood home, the ambient light from the street lamp outside casting long, distorted shadows across the hallway. 10 feet away, the 2 hired thugs were securely bound with heavy-duty tactical zip ties Jonah kept in his vehicle kit. The one with the broken arm was groaning softly. The other was still unconscious, zip-tied to a load, bearing radiator pipe. Jonah pulled the combat knife from his thigh sheath. The lock on the box was an old, cheap master lock, meant to deter casual snooping, not a forced entry. Jonah wedged the thick, carbon steel blade into the hasp and twisted with a sharp, violent jerk. The lock snapped with a loud crack, the metal groaning in protest. He flipped the lid open. A cloud of stale, trapped air rose from the box, carrying the faint scent of his mother's old lavender perfume. Inside lay a stack of neat, organized papers, several velvet jewelry boxes, and a thick, leather-bound journal. Jonah bypassed the jewelry, his eyes drawn to a bundle of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. He recognized the return addresses instantly. They were his letters, the letters he had sent from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The letters Percival swore had simply stopped coming. Jonah untied the ribbon, his chest tightening. The letters hadn't just been intercepted. They had been opened. Percival had read them, likely searching for any mention of Jonah coming home early or asking about the finances. Beneath his letters was another stack of envelopes, these ones written in Martha's elegant, cursive handwriting. They were addressed to Jonah, stamped, but never mailed. With trembling fingers, Jonah opened the top envelope, dated 8 months prior. "My dearest Jonah, I don't know if this will ever reach you. Percival tells me the postal service to your base is suspended, but I think he is lying to me. He is lying about a great many things lately. I am so terribly frightened, my brave boy. He comes over and yells about money, about the stock market. He forced me to sign papers last week. He said they were just tax forms, but he wouldn't let me read them. My memory isn't what it used to be, Jonah. I know I forget things, but I am not crazy. I am not losing my mind the way Percival tells everyone I am. Please come home. He took my phone yesterday. He locked the front door from the outside. It is getting so cold in the house. Jonah stopped reading. He had to squeeze his eyes shut to hold back the burning tide of tears. He gently set the letter down and picked up the leather-bound journal. It was a meticulous record of terror. Martha had documented every visit Percival made, every time he withheld her medication to make her seem more confused for the doctors, every heirloom he carried out of the house to pawn. The most damning piece of evidence, however, was tucked inside the back cover of the journal. It was a digital audio recorder. A small silver device Jonah's father had used for dictating notes. Jonah pressed the play button. The audio was slightly fuzzy, but the voices were unmistakable. "Sign the damn paper, Mom." Percival's voice hissed through the tiny speaker. "Percival, please. My hand hurts. I don't want to go to a home. I want to stay here until Jonah gets back," Martha whimpered. "Jonah isn't coming back," Percival roared. The sound of something smashing echoing in the background. "He's dead, Mom. A roadside bomb took out his whole convoy last week. The military liaison called me yesterday. He's gone. Now sign the paper so I can pay for his funeral." Jonah's blood turned to absolute ice. Percival hadn't just stolen from her. He had broken her spirit. He had used Jonah's dangerous deployment to manufacture a devastating lie, pushing Martha into a state of catatonic grief that Dr. Sterling then conveniently diagnosed as advanced dementia. It was a perfectly executed, utterly psychotic psychological execution. "Titan," Jonah whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal, terrifying calm. The massive German shepherd snapped to attention, his amber eyes locked on his handler. Jonah stood up, gathering the lockbox and its contents. He walked over to the two bound thugs. He pulled out his own cell phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a break-in at 442 Elm Street," Jonah said evenly. "Two armed men. They've been subdued. Send an ambulance. One of them has a compound fracture, and tell the responding officers to contact the FBI field office in Philadelphia. Tell them Staff Sergeant Mitchell has a delivery for them." Jonah hung up, slipped out the back door, and melted into the night with Titan, leaving the house of horrors behind for the very last time. The morning sun broke over the Philadelphia skyline, painting the glass high-rises in shades of brilliant gold and sharp orange. Inside the opulent, glass-walled conference room of Vanguard Financial, Percival Mitchell was sweating through his bespoke Italian suit. He had spent the entire night pacing his mansion, calling his cleanup crew over and over again, getting nothing but an automated voicemail. Jonah knew. Jonah was coming. Percival was frantically shoving client files, ledgers, and a stack of bearer bonds into a leather duffel bag. He had chartered a private Gulfstream jet out of Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, scheduled to depart for the Cayman Islands in exactly 4 hours. He just needed to clear the safe, get past Beatrice, who was currently screaming at her divorce attorney in the master bedroom, and get on the highway. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the Vanguard Financial lobby shattered with a deafening crash. Percival dropped the duffel bag, his heart leaping into his throat. He sprinted to the frosted glass wall of the conference room and peered through the sliver of clear glass. It wasn't Jonah. It was worse. 24 men and women wearing navy blue windbreakers with massive yellow letters spelling FBI and SEC were swarming the trading floor. They were carrying heavy plastic bins, bolt cutters, and stacks of federal warrants. "Nobody touch your keyboards. Step away from your desks. Hands where we can see them," a senior agent bellowed, his voice echoing over the panicked gasps of Percival's employees. Percival stumbled backward, the blood draining from his face. How did they move so fast? Federal warrants took weeks to secure. He didn't know about David Russo. The former JAG captain hadn't slept. After receiving the audio recording and the journal from Jonah at 3 a.m., Russo had marched into the home of a federal judge he had known for 20 years, playing the audio of Percival faking a Marine's death to extort an elderly woman. The warrants had been signed before sunrise. Percival didn't wait. He grabbed the duffel bag, shoved open the emergency exit door, and sprinted down 30 flights of concrete stairs, his lungs burning, his expensive loafers slipping on the steps. He burst into the underground parking garage, sprinting toward his Mercedes G-Wagon. He clicked the unlock button on his key fob. The headlights flashed, Freedom was just a 2-hour drive up the turnpike. Going somewhere, Artie? Percival froze. The voice echoed off the concrete pillars of the parking garage, calm, resonant, and dripping with venom. Jonah stepped out from behind a concrete support beam, blocking the exit ramp. He wasn't wearing his tactical jacket anymore. He was wearing his Marine Corps dress blues, the medals on his chest gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked like an avenging angel, immovable and absolute. Sitting perfectly still at his left side was Titan. The dog didn't make a sound, but his eyes were locked onto Percival with the predatory focus of a heat-seeking missile. Jonah. Jonah. Please. Percival begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. He dropped the duffel bag, raising his hands. You don't understand. The feds are upstairs. If they catch me, I'm looking at 20 years. You're looking at the rest of your life, Percival, Jonah said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. Wire fraud, extortion, elder abuse, attempted arson, conspiracy to commit murder. David Russo gave the FBI the whole package. Percival's eyes darted frantically around the empty garage. Desperation clawed at his mind, overriding whatever logical sense he had left. His hand shot into the pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a small, silver, .38 caliber revolver he had bought off a private security guard years ago. He leveled the shaking barrel at his own brother. Get out of my way, Jonah. Percival screamed, tears of panic streaming down his face. I will shoot you. I swear to God, I'll do it. Jonah didn't flinch. He didn't dive for cover. He just stared at the pathetic man holding the gun, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, sickening pity. You don't have the stomach for it, Artie. You pay other men to do your violence for you, Jonah said softly. Percival's finger tightened on the trigger. Jonah didn't draw his own weapon. He simply snapped his fingers, a sharp, cracking sound that echoed like a gunshot in the concrete cavern. Titan, strike. The command was issued in a calm, conversational tone, but the result was explosive. Titan didn't run. He launched himself. Covering 30 feet in less than 2 seconds, the massive K9 hit Percival with the kinetic force of a speeding motorcycle. Percival didn't even have time to blink, let alone pull the trigger. Titan's jaws clamped onto Percival's right wrist with absolute, bone-crushing precision. The .38 revolver clattered harmlessly to the concrete floor. Percival screamed in agony as the 90-pound dog tackled him to the ground, pinning him flat against the oil-stained pavement. Titan stood over him, his front paws planted firmly on Percival's chest, his jaws still locked around Percival's wrist. The dog wasn't thrashing or tearing. He was executing a flawless submission hold, taught by the most elite military trainers in the world. He applied just enough pressure to paralyze Percival with pain, waiting for the command to release. Jonah walked over slowly, picking up the dropped revolver. He popped the cylinder, dumped the live rounds onto the concrete, and tossed the empty gun aside. He looked down at his brother, who was sobbing uncontrollably, his expensive suit ruined, his empire reduced to dust. Hold him, T, Jonah commanded softly. The wailing sirens of FBI tactical vehicles and Philadelphia police cruisers suddenly echoed through the garage entrance, their flashing red and blue lights painting the concrete walls. It's over, Percival, Jonah said, turning his back on his brother, as the federal agents swarmed out of their vehicles with weapons drawn. Enjoy the dark. The scent of fresh pine, expensive paint, and warm vanilla wafted through the air, completely replacing the suffocating stench of mildew and despair that had once plagued 442 Elm Street. It had been 8 months since the raid on Vanguard Financial. The wheels of justice had turned with surprising, brutal efficiency. The audio recording of Percival faking Jonah's death had enraged the federal prosecutor so deeply that they refused any plea deals. Faced with the mountain of evidence David Russo and the FBI had compiled, Percival's expensive defense attorneys had folded. Percival Mitchell was currently serving a 35-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary in Florence, Colorado, stripped of his assets, his wife, and his freedom. Dr. Gregory Sterling had lost his medical license and was facing his own federal indictment for medical fraud and conspiracy. Through forensic accounting, The government had managed to seize and liquidate Percival's mainline mansion, his luxury cars, and his hidden offshore accounts. The recovered funds were placed back into a secure, court-monitored trust for Martha, with Jonah named as the sole, impenetrable guardian. Jonah stood on the freshly poured concrete of the driveway, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He was wearing faded jeans and a white t-shirt covered in sawdust. Behind him, the house was unrecognizable from the rotting corpse it had been a year ago. He had hired the best contractors in Riverdale to gut the property down to the studs. They had installed a state-of-the-art heating and cooling system, brand new oak floors, custom cabinetry, and widened the doorways to accommodate a wheelchair, just in case Martha ever needed one. The sagging front porch had been completely rebuilt, expanding into a beautiful wraparound deck adorned with hanging flower baskets. The front door, once a tarnished, peeling yellow, was now a vibrant, welcoming crimson. "Hey boss, we're wrapping up the landscaping in the back," called out Mike, the head contractor, walking around the side of the house. "Sod is laid down, and the new fencing is secure. The yard is completely dog-proof. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the hustle." Jonah smiled, tossing the man a cold bottle of water from a nearby cooler. Jonah walked up the sturdy wooden steps of the new porch and opened the front door. The living room was bathed in warm, golden afternoon sunlight streaming through the brand-new bay windows. Sitting in a plush, overstuffed armchair near the window was Martha. The transformation in her was nothing short of miraculous. The terrifying skeletal frailty was gone. She had gained back 20 pounds, her cheeks carrying a healthy, rosy color. Her silver hair was washed, brushed, and styled perfectly. The life-saving medications had restored a vast majority of her cognitive function. While she still had moments of forgetfulness, the natural progression of her age, the deep catatonic fog that Percival had purposefully induced, was completely gone. Resting his massive head on Martha's lap, eyes closed in absolute bliss, was Titan. The fierce, lethal warrior dog was currently acting as a 90-pound heating pad, letting Martha gently stroke his coarse sable coat. "He's such a heavy boy." Martha chuckled softly, her voice carrying the melodious, familiar tone Jonah had missed so desperately in the desert. "But he's a good boy. He's a spoiled boy," Jonah corrected with a grin, walking over and kissing the top of his mother's head. "He manipulated you into giving him half of your pot roast last night, Mom. Don't let him fool you. He's a tactical genius." Martha smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She reached up and took Jonah's rough hand in hers. Sunlight caught the gold band on her left ring finger, the wedding ring Jonah had recovered from Percival's hidden safety deposit box. "The house is so beautiful, Jonah," she whispered, looking around the bright, vibrant living room. It feels like waking up from a terrible nightmare." "The nightmare is over, Mom," Jonah said, pulling up a chair and sitting beside her. He looked at Titan, who opened one amber eye, gave Jonah a slow, lazy tail wag, and went back to sleep. "We're home, and nobody is ever going to take that away from us again." Jonah leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet hum of the new refrigerator in the kitchen and the steady, comforting breathing of the dog at his feet. He had fought through hell in the Middle East, and he had fought through a different kind of hell in his own hometown. But looking at his mother, safe, healthy, and smiling in the sunlight, the Marine finally allowed his internal guard to drop. The war was finally over. What a journey. From the battlefields of Syria to a shocking betrayal at home, Jonah and Titan proved that loyalty and love will always triumph over greed and deceit. Percival thought he could manipulate his own family for a payout, but he learned the hard way that you never, ever back a Marine and his K9 into a corner. If Jonah's relentless pursuit of justice for his mother gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and let us know your favorite moment down in the comments. Do you think Percival got what he deserved? Share this incredible story of resilience with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell for more intense, real-life dramas. See you in the next one.